For a long time, I have played with the thought of making an in-depth video about the world of The Witcher and the discussions surrounding it in the fanbase. I've been inspired by many bread tours, and while my English speaking abilities leave a lot to be desired, I wanted to share my view of the books, themes in the books, and how many people miss those entirely, or don't understand them correctly, with some opinions about the Netflix show and the games. As a Ukrainian born, living in Europe, I may miss some American context, but I also believe that this gives me a good perspective on topics like representation. This is also my first video, so excuse me if I'm not very good at structuring or in general. Well, let's get into it. In some circles, especially gaming circles, there are many people that make a big deal about quote-unquote forced diversity. I believe that while in some cases this sentiment is based on some understandable cause, most people saying it couldn't argue it in an honest way without admitting it. They just don't want black people to be in their media. The fact that this kind of person is a fan of The Witcher is ironic to me, because a huge portion of the books, and games to an extent, is openly portraying the dangers and ugliness of racism or exclusion and supremacist views in general. I honestly don't understand how a person can play as Geralt, a Witcher who is an outsider that people look down on in disgust because of his physical otherness, like his differently shaped eyes and hair color, even claiming that witches have no human emotions, to dehumanize them and excuse their treatment. See him get involved in things he has no business getting involved with because he has a soft spot for the oppressed, and watching him literally die while protecting oppressed minorities from an ethnic massacre, a so-called pogrom, being a huge fan of him, and then turning around and excluding people based on skin color. I'll give some more examples later, but the main point here is that Geralt tries to understand everyone and everything he comes across, refusing to kill any being that he doesn't consider a threat. Examples of those beings include dragons, general non-humans, and the cursed prince in the first short story. The games include a cross-dressing elven man, who isn't painted as deviant or in any way abnormal, just a really good tailor and friend of Geralt's best friend, Dandelion. Both Geralt and the womanizing bard treat him with respect, and his gender expression is shown as just another personality trait. In The Witcher 3, Geralt also speaks with a secluded hunter that, if you question him enough, reveals that he is gay. Geralt is understanding because he knows how easily society excludes anyone they deem different. In general, the topic of why forced diversity is bullshit has been done enough times, but I want to underline why exactly it goes against the spirit of the Witcher series in particular. Medieval Europe is an argument often made, and while the world of The Witcher is certainly made in some kind of reference to medieval Europe, the scale of the world isn't the same, with Geralt having traveled most lands in the span of the books, which should already show you that it is not the size of Europe, but much smaller, meaning that people from one part of the continent can reasonably be expected to travel to any other part of the world. Combine this knowledge with the fact that the people of Skellige, which are a stand-in for Vikings, and Zerrikans, who are dark-skinned, are both present in the books, I would argue that canonically people from Zerrikania could live in any other country too. There is no reasonable way to argue against the inclusion of dark-skinned people in the Witcher movies based on this argument. The next argument I've often heard is that since there is racism against elves and dwarves, how can we be expected to not have racism against dark-skinned people in the universe? While I understand where this thought is coming from, I think the far more reasonable assumption is the other way around. Since there are races that are so anatomically different to humans, why would humans care about small differences when there are elves that live twice their age, dwarves that are even more different looking than elves, and shape-shifting humanoids right next to them? And besides, the reaction of the mercenaries in the books to the black-skinned Zerrikanian guardians of Borsch Tree Jackdaws, and I hope I pronounced the name right, don't seem to imply that people have any kind of negative reaction to dark-skinned humans in the universe. The next point is a bigger one, and that is that the books are Slavic, so the cast should be white. And this one is a little bit more complicated. First of all, let's start off by asking, should the cast be white, or should the cast be ethnically Slavic? If the person saying this equates Slavic with white, well, they are equally as dismissive of the origins, and also show their true colors, being racist. If the person expects a true Slavic, or even a true Polish cast, I at least applaud their conviction. The problem here is that the Netflix show expects a global audience, with at least some focus on America. A Polish-only version of The Witcher might be interesting, and, as far as I recall, has been done before, but would never get the budget and mainstream appeal of the Netflix series. This is an issue with media experienced by all non-Americans, not just Poles, and I don't want to argue that it makes things right, but it at least is more understandable. But, speaking of American audience and the Netflix show, I have to voice my own complaints about the handling of the topics of race and racism. First of all, let me start by saying that I love the performance of Fringella's actress. Amazing, fitting the role well, and exactly how I wanted to see characters adapted with a different looking actor or actress. Her rise to power matches her calculating yet passionate demeanor. Istrid was also portrayed very well in my opinion, so I don't have anything negative to say about using actors of a different skin color than their original. That said, I disliked the Netflix adaptation for a couple of different reasons. For starters, being extremely American-centric. I understand that it's the easiest way to appeal to a global audience, but the series really didn't have the Eastern or European charm that it could have had, even with the characters portrayed by American actors, no matter black or white. The show fell flat on differentiating from every other classical fantasy setting. Even some traditional lace dresses and flower crowns, some white embroidered shirts instead of the usual grey clothes would be greatly appreciated, but even better would be actors with Eastern European cultural backgrounds. At this point, I'd like to say a few words about Slavic identity and whiteness. Why is this an issue anyway? Well, when was the last time a show portrayed Eastern Europeans in a way that is not A. mobster, or B. oligarch, or C. working class idiot? John Wick, 2012, and Merchant of Death. As a Ukrainian person, those are just the three movies that instantly come to mind where Ukrainians or Russians are portrayed as negative stereotypes, with a special example in John Wick, where other mafias are portrayed much more glamorously and beautiful, with one example being, spoiler alert for John Wick 2, the contrast between the rough, dirty, cigar and whiskey Ukrainian mobster versus the beautiful, classy head of the Italian crime family, who chooses her own death after heartfelt talk with Wick in her private pool. I believe this to be a remnant of the Cold War propaganda, where the East had to be shown in a negative light in contrast to the West, which by today's standards is not okay. Note here that I am a big critic of Russia in a modern political sense, but that does not invalidate the actual living people that are lumped together in this stereotype. In this regard, representation is important for the same reasons it is for any other group, avoiding negative stereotypes or reducing a minority's group to a single stereotype. The other point is that Slavs aren't represented by any white person playing a character. First of all, I want to note that Poland, Russia, Ukraine, while sharing many things, are inherently different cultures too, but they are more similar to each other than to Western culture. We share the same dishes, beloved childhood characters, movies that are considered classics. And a Polish blogger by the name of Dave Blazer wrote an article about what the Witcher games meant to him, and I'll link the post in the description, because he speaks about how Witcher shows off parts of Polish national identity that people outside of Poland wouldn't even consider. To sum it up, this was a great opportunity for representation for a group seldom portrayed in a positive light in media, and it was completely missed in favor of more easily marketable, Americanized diversity. Second, the show actually lacked in taking on racism past surface level. This is especially apparent in episode 2 of the show, where Geralt meets an elven king who now lives in exile, stealing food to survive, yet being too prideful to go to another, less rich land. The topic came far too short, with Geralt's advice of learning how to live together with humans, mostly ignoring that he was being pushed away from the lands he lived in by humans. This comes from the book, which, while having a very similar plot, spent a lot more time pondering the ramifications of what it means to be pushed out from your homeland. In the same episode, we see another non-human, the halfling servant that stabbed the woman helping Ciri, which, while I get how it was meant, wasn't built on a good foundation of seeing general disdain and oppression against non-humans, only a few scenes of the woman being kinda rude to him. So in the end, when he snaps and kills her in the chaos of a Nilfgaardian attack, it was just some non-human freaking out over something trivial and murdering a character that was nice to Ciri. Very weird optics. For the same reason, I dislike the handling of Dopplers and dwarves. The only thing so far I've seen about dwarves in the Netflix adaptation was them being rude and disrespectful in a bar in episode 6, where Geralt tags along for a dragon hunt, and the only Doppler we've seen in the show is a perverted, twisted monster who likes to kill children. Way to go, show. To contrast, in the short story of the first book, Eternal Flame, Geralt saves the Doppler Dudu, who is prosecuted and refuses to kill him even at own personal risk. Geralt knows that Dopplers can take the shape of any person they've met, and when copying their form, they also gain their memories and thought patterns, but they can only copy the parts of a person that they understand. Dudu, a good person at heart, is thus unable to understand the darkness in the souls of other people when morphing into them. And Geralt understands this, and lets him live. In the end, the Doppler made the person he was impersonating rich, himself taking on the persona of a cousin of his. Geralt finds good people almost everywhere in this dark, brutal world. Oppression and prejudice against non-humans is ever present and a central theme of The Witcher, and I feel like the show really dropped the ball on this one, at some points making it even seem justified. It's a hard topic to portray well, but if the showrunners didn't want it, they should have not gone for a Netflix Witcher adaptation. Lastly, and this might be me nitpicking, some of the choices in casting people of color were actually bad decisions. The huge, loyal black bodyguard of Queen Sintra is almost as bad of a stereotype as the concept of a noble savage, and the same goes for the elven boy, whose only job was to help and almost serve the blonde white girl for no reason at all, which I found pretty weird. And the Dryads, being just a group of black women, really didn't do the murderous and inhuman Dryad's nature justice, taking away from the magical and replacing it with the mundane, since there are a lot of other people looking like them in the show anyway. The Dryads of the books are girls who drank the water of a magic fountain that transforms them into those beings, and they have a heavy disdain for outsiders, who they often kill on sight. Granted, the Brokilon saga was wasted in the show anyway, because in the books Ciri gets lost in Brokilon woods long before the fall of her homeland, and Geralt rescues her when she flees the woods. The show instead chose to make the stay in the forest part of her running away from her pursuers, with some random helpful Dryads and the before mentioned murderous Doppler. To sum up my rambling, I feel like a lot of Witcher fans complaining about the show miss the core concepts of both the books and the games, or are arguing in bad faith. On the other hand, I still think that the show could have handled many topics better, because as far as I can tell, the showrunners are trying to make something good, but oftentimes go for the surface level optics instead of the deeper or less publicly marketable decisions. If you have any opinions about the things I've talked about, counter arguments or questions, feel free to tell me in the comments. I look forward to expanding my own understanding of things and getting other perspectives on it.